This is Tenerife, March 27, 1977, an island paradise floating in the vast Atlantic. But on this day, the dramatic clouds gathering overhead were a dark omen of what was to come. Down below, Los Rodeos Airport, a small regional hub, was about to become the unwilling stage for history's deadliest aviation disaster. It all began miles away, at Gran Canaria Airport, the intended destination for many transatlantic flights. A bomb, planted by a separatist group, exploded in the terminal. While the damage was minor, the threat of a second bomb forced authorities to close the airport entirely. Flights that were moments from landing were now circling, their fuel running low, with nowhere to go. The only viable alternative was the small, unprepared airport here in Tenerife, Los Rodeos. Suddenly, the quiet airport was inundated. One by one, massive jets were diverted, each one needing a place to park. The airport, designed for much smaller aircraft and lighter traffic, was quickly overwhelmed. Giant Boeing 747s, the queens of the sky, were squeezed onto taxiway's wings, nearly touching. Among them were two titans, Pan Am Flight 1736, arriving from Los Angeles and New York, and KLM Flight 4805, a charter from Amsterdam. Their passengers, weary but safe, believed the worst was over. They were wrong. The chain of events that would lead to catastrophe had just been set in motion. As the hours dragged on, a new problem descended upon the mountain airport. A thick, heavy fog, common to Tenerife, began to roll in from the sea, blanketing the airfield. Visibility dropped from miles to mere meters in minutes. Inside the control tower, a handful of controllers stared out into a wall of white, trying to manage an unprecedented number of aircraft on their congested airfield with no ground radar to help them. Down on the tarmac, the pilots were flying blind. After a long wait, Gran Canaria Airport finally reopened. The exodus could begin, but getting the planes out was even harder than getting them in. The massive KLM 747 had to backtrack down the single active runway to position for takeoff, a procedure known as a backtaxi. Following close behind in the dense fog was the Pan Am 747, instructed to exit the runway at a specified turnoff called Taxiway C3 to clear the way. Inside the KLM cockpit, Captain Veldisen van Zanten was a man in a hurry. He was one of KLM's most senior and respected pilots, but he was pushing his cruise duty time limits. Further delays could mean an expensive and complicated overnight stay for his hundreds of passengers. He completed his backtaxi, swung the giant jet around, and lined up for departure. He was ready to go. The Pan Am crew, meanwhile, was struggling. In the low visibility, they couldn't clearly see the taxiway signs. They missed Taxiway C3, which was a difficult 148-degree turn for a 747, and continued slowly down the runway, looking for the next, easier exit, C4. The two jumbo jets were now on the same runway, invisible to each other and invisible to the control tower. A deadly alignment of circumstances was falling into place. What happened next was a fatal breakdown in communication. The control tower radioed instructions to the Pan Am jet. At the same time, the KLM captain, anxious to depart, radioed that he was taking off. The two simultaneous transmissions overlapped, creating a high-pitched squeal on the frequency. The tower controller heard the KLM captain, but misunderstood his call as a statement of readiness, not of action. The controller replied "OK," a non-standard and ambiguous phrase, followed by instructions to stand by for takeoff. Critically, the KLM crew only heard the OK and missed the crucial standby instruction, which was blocked by the Pan Am crew's own transmission. Believing he had clearance, the KLM captain pushed the throttles forward. The four massive engines roared to life, and the 350-ton aircraft began its takeoff roll, accelerating rapidly into the dense fog. Inside the Pan Am cockpit, First Officer Robert Bragg heard the KLM's engines spooling up. He nervously radioed, "We're still taxiing down the runway, the Clipper 1736, but it was too late." The message never reached the KLM cockpit. Hurtling down the runway at over 150 miles per hour, the KLM pilots suddenly saw a shape emerge from the gray mist. It was the silhouette of the Pan Am 747, sitting directly in their path. A gasp of disbelief in the KLM cockpit. God! The Dutch captain desperately pulled back on the controls, trying to force the heavy jet into the air, attempting an almost impossible premature liftoff. The plane's tail scraped violently along the runway for 65 feet, showering sparks into the fog. For a terrifying, fleeting moment, it seemed like he might make it. The KLM 747 lifted off the ground, but not high enough. Its landing gear and the undersides of its engines sliced through the top of the Pan Am fuselage, just above the wings. The impact was catastrophic. The KLM jet, mortally wounded and now a massive fireball, stayed airborne for another 500 feet before slamming back down onto the runway, sliding for another 1,000 feet in a devastating explosion of fuel and metal. The Pan Am jet, its roof sheared off and fuel tanks ruptured, was instantly engulfed in an inferno. In the chaos, there was a glimmer of survival. On the Pan Am jet, 61 people, including the pilots and flight engineer, managed to escape the burning wreckage by climbing out onto the wing and jumping to the ground below. But for everyone on the KLM flight, all 248 passengers and crew, there was no escape. The impact and subsequent fire were instantly fatal. For hours, the airport's emergency services, unprepared for a disaster of this magnitude, struggled to even find the wreckage in the thick fog and smoke. When they finally located the burning hulks, they initially focused on the KLM fire, not realizing a second 747 was also on fire just a few hundred feet away. The investigation that followed was one of the most complex in aviation history. Investigators from Spain, the Netherlands, and the United States converged on the scorched runway. They analyzed the cockpit voice recorders, the flight data recorders, and the garbled radio transmissions. The final report identified a tragic sequence of events: the airport congestion, the fog, the radio interference, but ultimately, it placed the primary cause on the KLM captain's decision to take off without a clear takeoff clearance. The Tenerife disaster became a turning point for aviation safety. It led to sweeping changes in international airline regulations and cockpit procedures. Standardized phrases were mandated for all radio communications to eliminate ambiguity. Crew resource management, a system that empowers all crew members to challenge a captain's decisions, became a global industry standard. The lessons learned from that foggy runway were written in blood, but they have helped make air travel safer for generations since today. A memorial stands overlooking the airport, a quiet tribute to the 583 lives lost in the smoke and flames of that tragic afternoon. It serves as a permanent, solemn reminder of the day the sky fell on Tenerife, a reminder that in the complex world of aviation, there is no room for error, assumption, or haste. The deadliest accident in aviation history was not caused by a single failure, but by a chain of unfortunate events, human error, and cruel twists of fate. It's a story that, even decades later, continues to haunt the world of aviation and reminds us of the terrible price of miscommunication. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into historical events.